Welcome to this episode of Solved, plucked from deep in our archives. You may not realize we've actually been doing this show since way before it was called Solved and started being posted to YouTube, so this is good stuff. I also wanted to let you know that we're temporarily slowing down the pace of production for new episodes of Solved while we reorganize our processes here on the back end to get ourselves on better footing so that we can come back stronger than ever. You can help support us in this process as we hire additional help by becoming a member. Members get an extended version of Solved before YouTube, as well as ad-free versions of the Best of Left podcast available wherever you get your podcasts. So sign up at bestofleft.com/support. And now enjoy this throwback edition of Solved. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for listening and supporting the show. As always, as is often the case, the whole crew is with me. That's Amanda, Deon, and Erin. Offer the folks a greeting if you're feeling up to it.
Hey there.
How's it going?
We're starting the show like that, Deon? Dang.
I felt like giving that greeting. I don't think you have a claim on it, Erin. I think it is not your... I'm trying to pre-snark you or smug you before our first topic because, you know... You're going to have the moral high ground for sure.
Then I will resort back to, I hope everyone is doing as okay as they can do.
I'm not, clearly. I'm being defensive in advance.
We're in for a fun show, as you will soon see. So for context, before we were rudely interrupted by the election, we were having a discussion about marketing, like in broad strokes, how we come to think what we think, including how the fossil fuel industry infiltrated higher education, how big tech is surveilling students in order to use their own language to sell them shit, and how a bunch of Mormon women in Utah got everyone to buy Stanley cups, even though they spill when you tip them over. And originally, the plan had been to follow that show with a discussion of how we've been convinced to eat what we eat in much the same ways, and coming from a bunch of different angles. So that is where our conversation is going to start today. But given the outcome of the election and some other things, I have found myself needing to take things in a different direction. So we will discuss a discussion about how to combat grief in the course of engaging in movement politics, as though our words actually matter. And then finally, we will meditate on the nature of finite life, reckoning with that reality, and then proceeding to consider how we might act given that reality with a new sense of clarity and purpose. So I know that does sound like it's going to be fun, but I actually think it's going to be more fun than it even sounds.
Maybe cathartic, right?
Yeah, at least. First, though, I was having some thoughts on the nature of social media this week and the tendency for people to share fake news. I've been getting the show set up on Blue Sky, and so I've been looking at social media 500% more than I usually do, which is still not very much, but like I have been glancing at it. And the urge to share unverified news is so strong, I can report, because, and I'm sure people know this, we so often want for it to be true. Like we see something and we're like, oh, that's amazing or terrible, but like, I gotta tell someone about it. That's where that urge comes from. And so when like this news that I wanted to share first came across my screen, it was on social media and completely devoid of context. It was like a screenshot. It didn't show the news source. It said it was labeled news, but it sounded ridiculous and obviously fake. And so I was like, I want to tell someone about this, but I shouldn't, obviously, because, I should fact check that. But I didn't immediately, because you got to get out of the app and go to a browser and put in the search. And it's a whole thing. That's why people don't do it. But later I found myself, I was like, oh, I got to tell Amanda about that thing. But I was torn because I hadn't fact checked it. And yet I couldn't resist. I still told her the news before fact checking. That's how strong that urge is. Thankfully, I have since fact checked it. It is true. And so we can all share the good news. I mean, it's what, no one can stop talking about today. So I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. We can just all say it together. Orcas are wearing salmon hats again. Again. That's the most important part. Nostalgia marketing isn't just for humans. They haven't worn salmon hats since the 80s, but they're bringing it back. Isn't that amazing?
I need context. Like wearing salmon as hats or
Yeah.
Yeah.
dead?
Yeah.
That's just like an orca. That is
Be
just
more
like an
impressive if
orca.
they were alive.
See, exactly. It's exactly what you would think an orca would do. But they hadn't been doing it for like 40 years. But at least one was captured in a picture, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, they're doing the salmon hat thing
It's
up in Puget Sound in Washington.
I mean, it's just the phenomena of vintage style coming back around. I mean,
Absolutely.
orcas are not resistant to such
This is
to
what I'm
such
saying.
trends
Yeah,
and
just
cycles.
thinking of kids wearing the same things I wore in high school. Like,
Right.
Orcas wearing the same salmon hats that their grandparents wore.
Yeah, and their parents are
Right.
shaking their heads
Yeah, like
over in the
these
corner,
kids.
like, oh,
It was
God
so
damn.
stupid when my parents did it, and now my kids are doing it.
So this was the fun you were talking about. See, I didn't know what we were referencing.
No.
Oh.
We haven't gotten to the fun yet. This is just this is the palate cleanser.
Pre-fun.
Yeah. No, we're gonna get into some serious fun today. So, starting off, the first article we're discussing, as promised, is the sort of transition from that previous conversation about marketing and how we think what we think. This is from the New Republic called Confessions of a Former Carnivore. And I've highlighted some just like the major concepts that get addressed. It sort of starts out with confronting truth, right? So this is in the context of eating meat and meat production and factory farming, but like this is universal. So the writer describes street activists that would actually confront passersby with horrifying footage of factory farming and found that the people being confronted like actually seemed to appreciate the straightforwardness of that approach. One of the activists said, when you're honest, people appreciate it. They get the urgency of the message. I've learned, speak the truth. Don't just bullshit around. I call them hypocrites and they want to shake my hand. They're like, thank you, which is not necessarily what you would expect to happen, but I kind of get it, you know? And I mean, I hadn't planned it this way, but this also reminded me of a more recent conversation where we realized that being more direct and speaking more blunt truths is, I think, more necessary than that I like previously appreciated. And I think that people are sort of starving for straightforwardness. And so it like comes through with a sense of clarity that people appreciate it, even if they kind of hate the message or they're being really affronted by it, or it really gives them terrible cognitive dissonance that hurts them. It's still sort of refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
Deon, just before the show, you were talking about the era of bullshit and how we're so awash in it that
Well, I think that this election is a perfect example of this, right? The candidate who won is like a facsimile, like the most American version of straight shooter there is. He's completely full of shit, but presents as someone that's giving you hard truths and saying what's on their mind, even though he's just a liar. Whereas the other side was clearly market research to death, trying to say whatever the average of the most people would prefer to hear at any given time. There was no authenticity on one side, and there is perceived authenticity on the other side. It would be cool if there was just a real authentic truth option, but the more perceived authentic version won, not by an enormous amount. But like we've talked about this offline, is that I am not happy that Trump won. I don't want to say that, but I'm not as upset as I thought I would be, or that people that I know still are. And I think it's because of this, the truth shall set you free kind of moment of where it's going to be harder and harder to pretend that America is exceptional. It's going to be more and more difficult to keep this big lie of American greatness alive when there's just so many things about America that aren't, never have been, and on our current trajectory never will be great. So let's just be honest about it and then maybe do something to actually make it good. That's what I hope for. And that's why I feel like, there's this moment where it could go that direction, could go the other, where we like just go fully into the delusion. But there is this moment where we could just start being honest about the way things are, the way things were, and what we want going forward. And I think the Democratic Party specifically has a very difficult time just saying, what would be good if billionaires didn't exist. Not in the violent way that we heard about in the news today, but in a structural way where people can't have that much.
I'm not as optimistic as Deon, only because I see the things that are taking place, and not to veer yourself too far, but a lot of the scapegoating that's occurring, and then the policies that are going to be executed after. I see a feedback loop of there's a group that's being villainized. We're going to take actions such as invading Mexico, apparently. Don't worry, just on a limited basis. It's going to be real
Right.
respectful, I'm sure. But it's going to cause more migration, which again, like, things are going to get more violent. Things are going to happen because of the actions that we're taking. So I see the feedback loop. So I don't have that hope that we're just going to like come to realization. But again, maybe in sorting through these articles, we start to see the layering and how we're like, I do see animals as a class that we have rationalized violence towards. So I do think that there's parallels between that and human beings that we demoralize and that we don't advocate for. So I'm excited to have this discussion just because I think we can parse through some of this language and how it's used against us to frame how we feel about things.
I want to be clear. I'm not hopeful.
Okay. I was just like having a moment.
Yeah.
Like us being realistic, like about who we are as people. I can't see that. No.
Yeah.
To stand up for Deon, I can vouch that I have never known him.
I don't want to be slandered in that way, Erin.
Well, speaking of language, that really does come next, right? This is sort of, I coined the term today, cultural marketing, because all of this is trailing on from our straight up marketing conversation, but all of it really works the same way. And so this is how our cognitive dissonance between what we truly deeply know to be real and what we allow ourselves to believe, some of us, gets done. And it's all through language. So when it comes to meat consumption, there's the 4 N's. But again, you can sort of universalize these concepts. So the 4 N's start with claiming that meat is necessary. That's the first. Where else would we get our protein? The second is natural. What do you think cavemen ate? The third is nice. I could never live without cheese. And the fourth N is it's just normal, which of course is the most socially structured of the 4, right? Like, normal just is what we make it. And so if other people are eating meat, then it's normal. Therefore, I can feel okay about it, even if I have like a scratch at the back of my head about factory farms and all of that. And it goes on to explain the role of euphemisms. And this is where you can really draw parallels to politics and how the frank luncification of political dialogue gets focus grouped and tested until they know exactly what words to use to make people think what they want them to think, rather than listening to what people believe and trying to make policies that fit those beliefs. So, eating meats, like, there's the beef industry, but it could just as accurately be called the cow flesh industry. But that doesn't sound as appetizing. So
Mm.
we use a euphemism so that they can make more money. And and one activist was highlighted in the article describing their renunciation of animal secretions, another
Ugh.
like particularly unappetizing phrase that the writer was like, oh, I mean, the writer's vegan, but he was like, oh, I mean, if I had any lingering taste for mozzarella cheese, like, poof, animal secretions, put that one to bed right away.
And that, like, framework, I think is, like, insert the military industrialized complex, things going on right now, discussions that we're having about women's autonomy, like, things like that, I feel like fit perfect in the how they've been explained away, how you can get people to not be as enraged, by recent things as they should be.
Go on. What words should we use to enrage people more
I mean, it is
accurately?
kind of
Mhm.
like, war is always touted as necessary, and we don't talk about human carnage in the same terms that, like, hit those points, like, we talk more numbers, strategy, zoomed out aspects of it instead of, we're not listening to eulogies of places that we bombed of every person who's passed, like, you're not
Yeah.
getting any kind of depth to those people and the lives they've lived. So I feel like how we kind of shield things definitely dictates whether we're okay or not. Like most people would say they're against war, but they would also make the arguments that they're necessary.
Mhm. Mhm. I liked having a word for this psychological phenomena. They called it moral disengagement. And that was helpful for me, as it is often to have a word to describe something. They define it as the psychological mechanism by which people preserve a belief in their own fundamental goodness, even while doing harm. The hypocrite has been used to fill that space for a long time, but moral disengagement is much more accurate. Look, the world is very not good. And we have to survive, and our brains are wired to like protect ourselves. That is how we are wired. So it is not a moral failing that people are trying to build scaffolding to make themselves okay with existing and doing things in this world that they don't feel powerful enough to change. That's being human, right? The next step though is trying to work against the wiring of your own brain to make necessary change. And so it is an uphill battle. It's very difficult to do those things. And, you could expand this conversation beyond politics and global affairs and just talk about therapy and like working on yourself and like your brain gets hardwired to do things and therapy helps you try to change it. I mean, those are difficult things to do. So I think, especially when we're talking about meat consumption, I've, I'm like a pescatarian, Jay and I we eat fish and shellfish, not that often. But when I switched over, I very quickly realized like I did it because I worked through my hurdles. It wasn't because someone yelled at me about it or called me a hypocrite or convinced me by shaming me. Like, none of that worked on me, and I don't think that works on most people. And especially when it comes to food, this is harder to parallel, but food is not like I think they called it, "This is such a trifling and transient gratification." I don't think that that is accurate, and it's not the way to bring people in. Food is extremely important to humans, right? And so how we talk to people matters so much because we are not there to just tell them a truth and then be like, "Why don't you believe me now? And why haven't you changed everything about yourself?" Like, we are there to talk through the being human part of trying to change your mind. And that is so much more difficult and so much more time consuming, but that's really the best way to get there, you know?
Yeah, and there was another article. If we were going to do a whole show on the marketing of meat, there was going to be another article on it was I think it was titled "I'm a black vegan. Why don't you see more of me or more people like me?" And in there's a passage about how like, well, I knew that like becoming a black vegan would mean going to big events and being one of the only people there to not be able to partake in the sort of like traditional family foods.
Mhm.
And like sort of like what you're getting at, Amanda, is like it was described as like not easy, but like, well, yeah, like it's all right. Like I'm going to sign up for this, but why am I the only black person at this, vegan event and that sort of thing? But that I think is just like it's a balance, right? Like people have these conflicting ideas and like, well, do I want to be able to engage in the family tradition and eat everything that everyone else at the gathering is eating? Or do I want to adhere to these values? And they have to weigh those against each other. And I think people just do that calculation differently. And for vegans who are able to do that calculation and they're like, yeah, I'm out. Like, of course I'm out. It's really hard to perceive how people who are aware of the problems with meat don't come to the same conclusion because it's like, well, how are you doing your math differently? But like, this is what you're getting at is that food is incredibly important, but food is also, tied to culture and history and like how we're brought up and childhood. And there are a bunch of parallels to, I mean, the one I always think of from like when I was in the climate movement, the grandchildren of coal miners who would be like, coal is good because my grandfather dug coal out of the mountain and
Right.
he's good. It's like, oh boy, let's go to therapy before we try to save the climate, And like so much the same goes for food. It's like, but my parents and my grandparents ate meat and they're good people. So what are you trying to say? You know? But Amanda, you also brought up scaffolding, which
Mhm.
takes me right to the next point. And this is why I wanted to talk about this today. So, the marketing that we're talking about, combined with this intellectual scaffolding that we use to sort of construct our vision of the world. And this journalist in particular, writing this article, describes like how he attempts to approach the world in a way that avoids falling into dogmatism, but comes to the realization that his approach and most people's approach can also obscure simple truths. And so this is what he says. He's speaking about his son here. Russell and I had a series of dialogues about my ongoing carnism. I adopted a fatherly tone of broad mindedness and ecumenicism. The world is a complicated place, I sermonized, and that's what makes it interesting. Black and white thinking, blind dogma, and reductionism are intellectual traps to be avoided at all costs. I pointed out that I'm a journalist and therefore strive to be objective, non judgmental, and adventuresome. I told him one must never say never. Though Russell was by this point impressively well armed with an array of arguments, he didn't bother to recite them. I knew the broad outlines, of course, and he knew that I knew. Instead, he looked me full in the face, appraising me evenly, with a serious, uncompromising expression. Dad, he said, this is really happening. Something in that clear, unimpeachable formulation, in the way it called bullshit on all my rationalizations in one go, was precisely what I needed to hear. And I've had a very odd experience with that passage over the last 2 weeks since I read it. Every time I read that passage or even think back on it, tears well up.
Hmm.
And I think that what's affecting me is it's actually the combination of what's happening there. There's the effort by the son to cut through the bullshit with simple truth and the father's acceptance of that truth. One or the other wouldn't do it. Like we try to cut through bullshit all the time. That's not new and exciting to me. And we get told by people who listen that they either agree or disagree, which is fine and nice. But to have someone like say, in effect, you got through to me, I didn't see, or I didn't fully see, but you helped me understand. That is like some sort of transcendent element of the human experience for both parties. There's the striving to connect, there's the striving to understand. And so when the two come together, like I feel it deeply moving. And, we just had the holiday break and everything. And if you want more on that topic, Amanda and I just went to see the film A Real Pain. And I think it's basically a meditation on that whole concept, is like a striving to understand, a striving to get others to understand, and occasionally connecting. And so, I like watched the film and was crying, mostly not about the film, but about this article and that passage, that like every once in a while humans get together and make a connection and understand something new. And just to finish off, the writer continues on the same point. He says, meanwhile, Russell's admonition seems to have short circuited a proclivity I didn't even know I'd acquired, an ability to take the dire facts of a given situation while distancing myself from their implications. In time, his words became a kind of gravitational mantra, pulling me back down to earth as I struggled to absorb the latest news about the devastation of the climate, about the carnage in Gaza, about the sputtering of democracy, and on and on. And as people who follow the news for a living, I certainly resonated with that.
Yeah.
I think this one, like, the joking defensiveness aside from the beginning, but like, it really is a struggle for me, because living with cognitive dissonance in America, like living like with all the stuff that America does outside of America to other countries, is difficult. But this is something that we're doing, and I am actively participating in, and I know that I am. I know it goes against what I proclaim my values to be, and yet I still do it. And that little aspect of my own humanity and lack of willpower, or whatever it is tough to wrap my mind around. That, yeah, I'm doing this thing that I know I probably shouldn't be doing, because like, I don't know if any of you guys have actually killed an animal and eaten it. I have recently. It's not an easy thing to do, but there is something, I think, that attaches some meaning to it that we completely lack now in the way that our food is set up. Like, we're regularly doing the feast of a collective gathering and hunting, and a successful hunt on just a Tuesday morning at 10. There's no effort, there's no connection to the process, there's no respect of the animal or all the people involved. There's nothing. There's no connection. Like, there's no connection. This might be the biggest example of our lack of connection as people as there is. Like, it's connected to climate change, but it kind of is like the climate change subject. Like, it's difficult. There's a lot of steps to go to fixing it. But this one is really direct. Like, you cannot live without food. You can't cut food out of your life. So how you get food is important. And we have just put it on rails. And now it's not something we think about. It's just automated. And are we automating away our humanity? Is this an example of us not being fully human? And like, thinking about that and really sitting with it is hard as fuck. Like, it really is. So like, this might be way more important than I ever thought it was. Just talking about, you should be a vegan just for your health. But like, maybe it's not that. Maybe you should be a vegan for your humanity.
Yeah, I think sometimes people ask me what is my reason, thinking it's a single solitary reason. And I find that really hard to answer because I'm like, no, it's everything all at once together. It's climate, it's caring about the lives of animals and how they're treated. It is health to some degree. Like, it's all of it together. There is no, and like for some people, one of those things might be bigger than others. But I will say this, I am often, very often, reminded of why I am doing what I am, why I am making that choice. And I'm grateful that it is constantly coming up, that I'm being, like, bombarded daily with, "Yeah, you're making a decision that fits your morals." And it doesn't even like, I care about other people hopefully doing it too, but it's actually, like, a much more deeply personal thing for me because I want, to the best of my ability, to live my morals, and this is one way that I can do that. It's not perfect, and there's, like, I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about the imitation meat industry and, like, the influence of capitalism and plastic and, like, all sorts of, like, it is not perfect, and I think being honest about those conversations is important when talking to people about alternatives and whatnot, but, like, I'm not a religious person. Choosing not to eat meat is, like, the closest I get to some sort of spiritual, like, choice or decision, and I've never really said it that way, that just kind of came to me right now, like, it makes such a outsized difference to me personally, and also makes an outsized difference on a larger scale.
I feel like a lot of the conversation around it is where humans operate the worst, which is shame. Like, I think a lot of the defensiveness and things are like people who, like, they realize it's bad, but also there's so many excuses that you can lean on. So instead of just like sitting with that uncomfortability, like it's easy to lean on those reasons of, well, protein and this, that, and the other. We've all heard it. We don't need to go into 'em. I think for me, though, like shame isn't exclusive to making the choice not to eat meat because I carry guilt and shame about how I talk to people about it because I got so used to people's reactions that I took a very comfortable way by making them uncomfortable. But I actually separated myself from caring about animals because of the reaction that people get. Like, it automatically becomes like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you're on that crusade."
Yep.
Or like, "Oh god, you're so holier than thou." Again, deflection of the guilt that you're feeling yourself because you understand that it is cruel,
Mhm.
that we don't treat animals well, like, for various reasons, just aren't on the change for it. But me also, like, I could have leaned into the conversation of, like, "Why are you having that reaction to caring about animals? Like, let's have a discussion about it." But instead, I'd just be like, "Well, my brother had cancer twice, and so I did this for health reasons." Cleared the conversation real easy. It's not untrue. Like, that is my initial reason. That's not why I've stayed vegan. That's not why I continue to do that. I'm much more aligned with Amanda, where if I have a value set and I live by that, I have to see it reflected in other aspects. And like, yes, I made that step, but there's still other ways, like consumerism. Like I look at my consumerism and I'm like, yeah, that definitely could be a place where
Mhm.
I grow and I change in, like have a different perspective on. So I'm glad, like, while we're having this conversation, Dion, I really felt what you said. But I'm glad that we're doing it with the understanding that we all participate in the systems that we're under in various ways. But like,
Mhm.
I think the conversation around how do you live that more authentic life? Like, how do you stay true to those parts of yourself that you have made a commitment to? How do you stay loyal to the values? Because at the end of the day, like, a lot of the times that's what we have. We have our values and we have the lines we've drawn. And so, I mean, I really like how we're approaching the conversation and how we continue to talk about it with that idea in mind.
And I do think the rest of the conversation today is going to keep touching on these subjects. So let's move on to the next article, which is from Truth Out. For our movements to win, we must learn how not to let our grief destroy us. And it's a conversation article, so it's basically a long transcript. And there's discussion about how grief shows up in our lived experience, particularly in a political movement type experience, whether in real life or virtually on social media and places like that. And at one point, it describes that because so often what we are fighting against, we are actually powerless to inflict damage upon, like the state. We may be angry or traumatized by state violence, and we are unable to inflict anything on the state. Therefore, we will tend to target anyone who will be receptive to our rage and anger, so we can like feel that we've made a dent in the universe somehow. And that is described as a thing people do, definitely not a good thing. And so one person is talking about how, quote, Huey Newton gave a speech in 1970 addressing the women's liberation and gay liberation networks. And they say, I think about that speech nearly every day. In it, he says, quote, friends are allowed to make mistakes. The enemy is not allowed to make mistakes because his whole existence is a mistake and we suffer from it. But the Women's Liberation Front and Gay Liberation Front are our friends. They are our potential allies, and we need as many allies as possible. And so I think that's just a jumping off point for like, we're all in a bad way, but holy shit, do we need to be thoughtful about how we manage being in a bad way to not harm those who are actually on our side, or to harm the coalitions that we could be building, whether we have the energy for it in this exact moment or in the coming years. Like, we need allies. We need all those people.
I think being truly progressive is hard. Like, it's hard to allow that space because I feel like we're so often dehumanized that I've like had to coax myself into a gentleness, realizing that I have more in common with, moderates than,
Hmm.
maybe Trumpers at least. Right. But it is hard because I feel like the dismissiveness that occurs when you disagree with the approach and things like that, like progressives are often accused of living in some fantasy world of like being all about the utopia, things like that, that we don't understand how the world actually is. And so when I approach conversations, I'll go into it with a defensiveness. My best friend is married to a moderate, and him and I often engage in these discussions. And I always go into it with just that sense of defensiveness. And it took some of that inner reflection of like, why do I do that? Like, we do agree on most things. Why do I go in prepared for the things we disagree on? And I think it comes with that. Like, it does require both sides to come with that sense of connection. And I think that's super important because when you're right, like the purpose of the conversation is to be right, you're not necessarily looking for that. You're not looking for the middle space, if you will. And I'm not saying to compromise any values, but I myself have struggled with coming into these discussions and just being more gentle, like realizing that we're all people trying to figure it out, that there's a lot of fear that's going around, and we have to find these ways to connect. We have to find what we agree on and continue discussing the things that we disagree on. But I will say, like, that defensiveness, definitely in the I'm so used to being knocked down and dismissed as if I don't know what I'm talking about, that
Yeah.
it makes it hard.
And I think that comes from exactly the shame you were talking about earlier. Is because when you're progressive, there's a couple things going on. Like, you are hoping to work for a better world. You are also still human. So you aren't at that place. You're not living in the world that you hope exists. So how could you be like I recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine who I guess he's a moderate. Like, I don't even know how to describe him politically, but he said, I think you're more of like a centrist. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, I mean, because you don't really like talk about like trans rights and all the stuff
Oh,
all the time. I was like,
Jesus.
I don't. You're right. I don't talk about it all the time. Let me go ahead and define it for you. And then I went through like, well, here's why I don't talk about it all the time, because I think it's a given that they should have all the rights that they should have. I think everybody should have X, Y, and Z. And I went on all this stuff. He's like, well, yeah, you're kind of talking about a utopia. I was like, yeah, yeah, I am. Like, and I think we should get there. Like, why do you not think that? And he's like, well, that's not the way the world is. Like, I'm not, I know the world isn't. You're right. It isn't that. And that's why I would like to progress towards that. And I think we all would be better if we did. And I think it brings in this shame from other people, like they know it too. Like, everybody knows it, right? We feel that this isn't right one way or another, and like in different ways. And maybe they think if we went a completely different direction, it would be better. But I think the status quo is not acceptable. And when you are talking about your progressive values, you are telling them that the status quo that they may be totally comfortable with is not okay, and that they should do something. And that's why, like with the, the vegan topic, that's my discomfort point. That's my, like, I'm not living my values. But it's also like the realization that I'm also not living actively. I'm a lot of times just doing things on autopilot. And that can get scary, because when you're on autopilot, it can just go by and you're just in this rut where you're not doing human stuff. You're just a part of something. As Erin may have said earlier about being a cog, like sometimes that's how it feels.
Mhm. I want to talk about realists for a quick second, because that's often seen as like a positive term, like, oh, I'm a realist. That is more and more to me just a defense mechanism to excuse, you know, gestures around to everything. And I have been faced with those people often in my life, and this is where it's hard for me to see where they're coming from, because I can understand being defeatist. I can understand being like, it's never worked before. We've tried and nothing. I can actually get that perspective. The realists, though, don't even want you to try. They're just like, what's the point? This is how it all works. There is absolutely no way to change things. You need to get on board, or you're living in a fantasy, which is bonkers to me and has always made me quite angry. But now I'm looking at it through the lens of, that's how you deal with a world where you don't feel like you have any power. That's how you get through your day, probably. Well, work sucks, but I literally can't do anything to change it. This is just how the world is. Like, you know, fill in the blank, right? With whatever it might be, personal and international or national. And, and because I've been having this thought recently, like, before the election, but ongoing and more often. Why don't they want something better? Like, why are we the only ones who are like, hi, this doesn't have to be this way? There really doesn't seem to, even on the right, like their quote unquote ideas don't actually lead to anything better. They are told lies that it might, but there's no real vision of what that is and how that looks. We seem to be the only ones being like, change is possible. You don't have to live this way. We have done change throughout human history. Yeah, some was successful and some wasn't, but we have. So there's a proven track record here. Why don't you want that? And as we slip into, I mean, I don't know, it feels like we're beyond late stage capitalism. Feels like whatever the next stage is, that's where we are, like deep corporate cronyism, oligarchy, shit show. I don't know. I'm sure there's a word. Like, as we get closer, more and more of these quote unquote realists seem to pop up, just like knocking you down when you try to stand up and say it could be different. And that is going to be the most exhausting part, because it will suck the energy out of you. It will absolutely like wring you out. And it is so freaking necessary to make sure that doesn't happen. And as this article is pointing to, the only way to make sure that doesn't happen is to be in community with the other people that want a better future and want to see change. That's how you get the life force back. There's no way to get it back otherwise. You got to be with other people who are like, shit shouldn't be like this. Let's try to change it.
I love that you brought up the realist because, like, when I was thinking of the thing about being degraded for your politics, I would say is in that, like, that I'm a dreamer, right? I'm a dreamer. Like, I'm a realist. You're a dreamer. And what I ended up doing was taking back realism. Like, oh no, I'm a realist. I just went a step further than you.
Mm-hmm.
I fully understand what the world is like. You just forgot the part where
Right.
you dream of a better one.
That's
If
awesome.
you
Yes.
realize
Yes. The next
that
step.
we have enough resources that everyone can live this life, like that is realism. Realism is also the next step of knowing we have the capability to change. It's not just taking stock of where we're at. And so, yes, I am fully on the I'm a realist, but I argue way harder. Like, I'm definitely more of the realist, I promise.
I love that. I love that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you take a long enough view of history, how could you come to any conclusion other than humanity keeps changing and reinventing itself?
Mm.
So believing that we're static is absurd. Amanda, as you were talking, I wanted to like argue back against like, do we even like, is there one static definition of realist? Because like this next passage I was going to get to could be described perfectly as a realist.
Mhm.
It says, the reality is that ideology alone won't save us. We have to actually spring into action on the basis of our ideals, and those actions have to be calculated on the basis of what's feasible and the material realities around us. That is just all of
Yeah.
it right there. That is realism. That is dreaming. That's putting dreams into action based on the reality. Like, it's not that confusing. Anyone who thinks it can't be done or shouldn't be tried, obviously, is silly. They're just silly. I'm trying to be nicer.
Good job.
Yeah. And I pulled this as just sort of like a quick reference guide that you should take with you all the time. It says, we need to apply a filter that asks, what am I doing for the movement when I write this post, or when I yell at this person, or when I draw this line? Am I attacking a friend or an enemy? Should this be a DM? Is this actually about me, or is it about the movement?
Mhm.
Do I need a break from social media today? In essence, it says we need to start thinking of ourselves as political actors in a world whose actions and words matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not on social media a lot, so I don't get in those fights, but that so nicely summarizes my view on people who unproductively use social media while trying to be productive. They're trying to make arguments, they're trying to build community, they're trying to push the movement forward, but aren't quite hitting the mark. And that feels like the cheat sheet for how to do better and why.
Yeah. There was a part in this article later on about, like it's okay to be emotional and like center some of those emotions sometimes. And, it's a very nuanced take, obviously, like when there's death and destruction happening, but it's not happening to you personally. Like how much space can you take up for your emotions? And they were like, it's okay to feel it. In fact, like that's important. Like that's no one should shame you for crying over like horrific things that are happening in the world. And that's very true on the personal level. I think where we are right now, it's very easy to get on social media and center in a different way because you have to recognize that I'm having an emotional response to what I'm learning or seeing happening. And that needs to be dealt with a friend, with my community, my fellow activists, like in a more personal way instead of getting on the internet and expressing all of that emotion because and I wish it was different, but it's not. Like social media is a strategic tool, and if we don't start seeing it that way, then it is a problem because the other side is seeing it that way. They're using it that way. And so we have to be aware of that. And I kind of love what is being advised. It's to move offline more often, like to be in real world community with people more often. That is so much better for our mental health in general and political discourse in general. Like those things, that's a very positive shift. It's not that we're not using technology or engaging with it or using it as the powerful tool that it is, but there are times and places for it. There are purposes for it. And seeing it as a tool, which is what it should be, not where you spend all your life, it should just be a tool, is really important. And I'm glad that's coming up in these kinds of articles.
It's very difficult to say almost any of the things that are said online in person, unless you're a
Mhm.
complete sociopath, and most of us aren't.
Right.
So, like, you're more likely to come to some kind of understanding if you're in a room having the disagreement as opposed to online. It's just human nature.
Mhm. I also thought, sorry, just one more passage. This is an amazing article and people should read it. These activists they just know what they're talking about, and it's really important to hear them. One of them is a labor reporter, and so she was kind of thinking about all of this through labor organizing terms. She was thinking about tenant organizing these days because, quote, these are the places where we have to organize across difference. We have to organize with the people that capital has chosen for us, our bosses, our landlords, rather than the people we choose. Organizing within the prison is similar. We do not choose the people we are thrown next to, and we have to figure out how to communicate in these spaces to articulate our common interests with one another and against the boss, the landlord, and the prison. It's in these spaces that we learn how to change minds and to let ourselves be changed.
Yeah, that one stuck out to me as well, particularly in relation to the first article, and what stuck out to me from that was the phenomenon of opening yourself up to not just convince other people and change other people, but open yourself to being changed and recognizing how much that is for the better so often. However, I will hasten to point out that we just made a whole episode titled Keep an Open Mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. Because as I was prepping for this conversation, I wrote down like it should be more like a part of our culture to be open to new ideas and recognize that changing your mind is good. And then I was like, oh no, I bet like everyone who listens to Joe Rogan would argue that that's what they're doing. So careful.
If you find yourself changing and loving people more, you might be doing it right. If you find yourself changing and thinking we need to close the borders, get guns, maybe you're changing the wrong direction.
I turned 40 a couple of years ago. And so I started realizing that I'm going to die. And so when this piece from The Atlantic, "You Are Going to Die," came across my feed last month, I thought, yeah, all right, let's take a look at that. And I think this fits in with our conversation today. So it was a conversation with Oliver Burkeman. He's written at least a couple of books on this topic. The first was 4,000 Weeks. I missed it the first time around, but it's a huge bestseller. 4,000 Weeks is the approximate length of a life, like an 80-year-old, something like that. And the second book, which I have actually read 3 chapters of and plan to continue, is called Meditations for Mortals, which is sort of like a distilled, slightly more action-oriented version of the philosophy brought forward in the first one. And in essence, the argument is, well, I guess for context, you need to understand that Berkman sort of came from a place of efficiency, life hacking, inbox zero, how do I get all my stuff done sort of a thing. And maybe in going through that process, realized that's not the path to freedom. It's the path to something. Like doing your bullshit work more efficiently might still be good in the sense that it'll give you more time to do the stuff that's important instead of spending more time on the bullshit. But that's not like the path, because there's no point at which you get to the point where you've done all the bullshit and you can finally relax. And that is sort of the realization being put forward in these books. It's gaining freedom. The hope is to gain a sense of freedom from embracing that you will never be able to do it all. So whereas you might struggle with like, well, I'm having a hard time doing it all, but if I work a little harder, maybe I'll be able to. Or if I find a better hack or I'm more efficient, then I'll be able to. And once I either do it all or create a system in which I can sort of sustainably do all the things that I need to do, then I can come to a place where I relax a bit. And he's like, no. What you need to understand is that place doesn't exist because the amount of things you could be doing are infinite. Therefore, the chances of you doing them is zero. And there's like a freedom in that. It's like, oh, so I can't do everything and there's no chance I ever will. So I don't have to try to do everything anymore. Maybe I could reorient how I think about all of these things. And from this article, it says it's sort of summed up in a favorite quote of his by the Zen teacher Charlotte Jocko Beck, quote, "What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured." And Berkman's solution is to develop a taste for problems, a readiness to say to yourself over and over that problems are what life is fundamentally about. And I'll stop talking here after I say the last bit. It says that peppered throughout the techniques he prescribes are reminders that there is no way of mastering the situation of being a human in the 21st century, and that trying to do so is an escape hatch from reality. And I would say that that one stuck with me because it feels like what we complain about a lot. I feel like we complain about the nature of humanity stuck in the 21st century, which is not particularly conducive to what humans need. And that line about like, there isn't a way to master being a human in our reality feels like just another version of like, you're not going to get everything done. You want the world to be one way, but it's the other way.
Mm.
So the faster you come to peace with that, the faster you can move on and figure out how to be in the world the way it is.
Yeah. I read that as also a way to kind of filter out stuff and focus on what you actually care about. That, like, you may still have big dreams and goals. It's not that you wouldn't care about doing anything, but you might be able to streamline it a bit and then actually accomplish like one of those things that you're really wanting to do. And yeah, that's a type of freedom as well.
I agree though that like people get so distracted in the day to day that they don't often like ask themselves, is this something that I need to get done? Is this something that I want to get done? Things like that. So, like for example, my mom's been struggling with my nieces getting older and just like not sure how to make the connection with them, like make it last and have that,
Mhm.
relationship moving forward. But in that, she also makes decisions to prioritize other things, such as cleaning the house on Sunday instead of maybe attending a ball game or something like that. So I like this article because I feel like it challenges those decisions of like, yes, okay, like you ideally would want your house to be clean, and you also want to spend time with the grandbabies, but like in the actual perspective of life, like where's your value? What's going to add to and what's going to make you happier? It's probably going to be spending time with the grandbabies. So maybe prioritize that over the other mundane tasks because, as he pointed out, like the house is always going to need cleaned. That is a actually endless
Mhm.
task because once it's clean, you start the process of it getting unclean.
I don't know if I've talked about it on here before. I feel like I have, but I know we should talk about death more in America.
Mhm.
Like it's part of the artifice, the bullshit that we have. Like it's hidden, it's pushed away. Old people are pushed in a home. The first time you see a loved one die, they'd already been treated and just they're not the same. That's not who that person was. We don't talk about it, so it's not as real as it should be. And I think we should talk about it, and it's not as real as it should be for me. I know it's not. This has been like might have been a best series of articles Jay ever sent us to like to wake me up personally from this feeling I've been feeling lately. I think we get told when you talk about death it's morbid. But why? Because it is one of the few things we will
Mhm.
all do as a group.
Yeah.
And we have kind of lost the language of how to talk about it because we did just talk about it in religious sense for a long time. And a lot of us aren't either religious or just non-religious. So we don't have the language that we should to talk about this universal fact of life that it ends. I've always thought, and having conversations like as a young atheist in like my 20s with religious people, them thinking that, oh, well, life can't matter because you think there's nothing at the end. It's like, I think life matters more because there's nothing at the end. Like, this is the only part that matters. So, if not focus on death, but like more of a reminder on a day to day basis that this does all end. And I think that would shake us out of a lot of the just being on rails of our society where for me, where food isn't something I really think about. Like I just gobble, 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 like whatever is in front of me, as opposed to thinking about the where, the how, the why, the doing what it is I want to do why I want to do it. Thinking about the why more often. We so often don't think about the why, we just do. And I think it's because we aren't thinking about the finite nature of all this.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, your description of being on rails is another way of sort of saying what this next quote gets at, which is another that really stuck out to me. It says, explaining his goal to me, Berkman sounded slightly more mystical than his straightforward prose. And he said, a lot of what looks like our attempts to manage our lives successfully are really attempts to hold the full intensity of that aliveness at bay. And, like speaking of meditations, I had to sit with that one for a bit. I had to process that. The marketing of productivity culture probably shaped my thinking, because this article sort of goes on and says that productivity culture turns life into something to get through until some unspecified better moment. That moment, he writes, won't come unless we admit that this often unpleasant, completely uncontrollable, forever changing water is all we have to swim in. So, yeah, so like we've got the acceptance of the situation we're in to get through. And, I feel like I heard somewhere that in our collective effort to avoid thinking about dying, we forget to live. Like we distract ourselves from things that are real, and therefore we end up doing bullshit. And the bullshit is actually what makes life go by quickly. I learned this years ago that it was sort of described that patterns or habits can be positive, but like things that happen a lot, things that you do on a regular basis, are the enemy of recognizing the passing of time. And so that's why COVID went by and no one can remember that year, because we did so much the same thing day after day for so long that it just became like time that almost didn't exist. And the best way to make your life last longer is to do new and interesting things as often as possible, which is sort of another way of describing that like intensity of aliveness, right? It's like, how much are we going to grab life? How much are we going to live while we're here? And I I've been thinking a lot about impatience recently. I have teenage nephews, and so like I witness plenty of impatience. And now see, I'm in my 40s. I'm going to keep bragging about being in my 40s. That seeing their impatience from an adult lens makes me remember like, oh yeah, I remember being impatient, about a bunch of things in life, and like wanting very much to get through whatever it was I was not excited about doing. And I have recently realized that feeling impatience with life is really not that different from rushing towards death. Or if you're frustrated with a person and how they are, you might be like impatient for them to die. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not on board with that. So I better stop being impatient about life and what's going on and the people around me. And now I actually find that most of my impatience is reserved for people who aren't appreciating the moment well enough. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? Don't you understand? We're all supposed to be like appreciating that we're all here together. Let's soak this up while we can. Like there's plenty of time to waste later when we're not together, when we're not in conversation, when we're not having whatever the situation. But yeah, so I'm trying to be less impatient, because what the hell am I trying to hurry myself towards?
Jay, you just did the thing that I think you were describing earlier when you said in the first article, the guy talking to his son, and his son says, like, this is real, Dad. And you just said, we're all here together. And that hit me differently. I've heard that said in many different ways, but like, we're all here together right now. How lucky. Like, that's pretty cool, like on the cosmic level, like, and well, I'm gonna have to process that for a while. I don't have an immediate reaction. I'm gonna sit with that for a little bit, because even as messy and terrible as a lot of this world is, there's still some pretty deep beauty in connection and your fellow humans. And the struggle is the duality, right? Like being able to understand and accept and take in both at the same time.
It's thoughts like that that make me embrace being the weird, eccentric aunt, if you will. Uh, I was with my niece, and honestly don't remember what brought the conversation to this, but I was just talking to her about what the chances of like being born into the fam, like us having this shared timeline were. And like, how awesome is that? Like, you and I are existing on the same timeline, even if, yours continues beyond mine. So, like, I love that you're having a moment with that, Amanda, because I've really embraced the I am alive at the same time as these other people, that all of the people in this world at this time, I get to share moments and experiences with, like, you all, for example. It's awesome to be alive at the same time as all three of you. Like, it's awesome to have our timelines intersect in the way, because this wasn't guaranteed. There definitely were
Mhm.
many things that would have caused it not to happen. So, I am embracing that what as my, stepdad so lovingly refers to it, hippiness. But I mean, I don't care because
Your crunchy
yeah, because
granola-ish?
like,
Yeah.
what's the alternative? A lot of religious people I know, they're waiting. Like, that thought that we're
Mhm.
all talking about, and, like, that moving closer to death, like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you have that mind frame if on the other side of it is that better world that's painless, that you're just going to be able to exist exactly how you want? Like, of course, you want the promise of what comes next. So, death death would be okay. Like, they gave you a crutch that will end up making you pass time instead of finding the value in the right
Yeah.
now.
And it was a coping mechanism. I actually don't fault, like,
Oh,
religion
yeah,
for becoming a thing because I
absolutely.
totally understand why
Yeah.
it became a thing. But we have different ways to process all of that now, and healthier, I would argue, ways.
And I do think you can have religion and have value in now. I think I mean, a lot of it's framing. Like a lot of this is,
Mhm,
we've been
mhm,
talking about today is marketing and framing. Like you can be religious and miserable, or you can be religious and have a full, healthy, happy life here.
mhm.
Maybe you think there's something on the other side, maybe you don't. But while you're here, you can make your life full and meaningful. You don't have to believe in an afterlife for that, or you could. Like that's a choice. But what's a fact and what is a belief? Let's be realist for a little bit. We are here
Mhm,
now. Like that's the
mhm.
real. And we get to do what we can to make it as full and meaningful as possible now. So we should do that. And I think we just completely made me feel okay about parenthood and this guilt that I've had about bringing a child into this world because none of this is guaranteed, Not a single thing is a guarantee. There's no
Mhm.
perfect outcome for any situation. Like everything could go bad, everything could be good. Like who knows? So meanwhile, I have a child who's here who is just this little light of happiness and joy and like innocence and peace. And I get to experience my life with her and my wife, bringing her up until she can have these conversations about being a cynical asshole later. And I think, you know, I, I think that's okay.
So the last piece of this article that like really resonated with me in an uncomfortable way, he says this is just the writer saying, I've felt more times than I care to admit that despite my heartbeat and mortgage and two walking, talking children, I'm not yet inside my life. Someday it will start, I imagine. The part of my life in which I'm really engaged, really moving forward, really jolted with the electricity of having a mind and body that can interact with this wild world. I'll leave behind this practice life for the real one. And that's the struggle, right? I mean, like, I have felt the essence of that sentiment while recognizing it is not true. And so, ultimately, like, every once in a while, you just need to have that bubble punctured, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is really happening.
Right.
The lessons from the activists and the Berkman writing about our 4,000 weeks, like my big takeaway is, okay, so this is really happening and we're all like real humans trying to get through it together. There needs to be management of emotions and grief and stress, for ourselves and recognizing that in others. And where Berkman comes in is understanding that you can't do it all. Therefore, prioritize. So, I mean, to bring it back to, I said that I pulled these articles kind of because of the outcome of the election and some other things. And I've been relieved that there is not energy behind a big protest after this election. That's not what we need right now. We did that. People need to get their energy out. People need to get engaged. But that's not what this moment calls for.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're not doing it is a sort of unconscious collective understanding that,
Yeah.
well, look, legitimately, there are a lot of people who aren't doing it because they're checking out. Hopefully they'll be back. And those of us who aren't checking out are not pushing for a big march for the most part, because we know we have limited time and energy, and there are more effective ways to use that time and energy. And so just as with, you're never going to get to inbox zero, you're never going to create a progressive utopia, but there are things worth striving for and recognizing that every choice you make is a choice to not do something else. So, I mean, there was mention in one of those articles about people who seem like they're on Twitter 24/7 and they justify it to themselves by saying they're doing activism. Maybe sometimes. Is that the best use of your time? If your response to the Trump election is you're following in great detail every new appointment and the life story of every new cabinet member, is that the best use of your time and energy? That's not how we're spending it. Our job is to curate the news for you. We're going to talk about Trump. We're going to talk about his cabinet. We're not going to talk about the deep background life story of every cabinet member and focus on every single day-to-day atrocity from Trump over the next 4 years. That's not the best way to use your energy. So whether it's in politics or in life or in activism, like all of these messages, they resonated, but they came together in a way that made a lot of things make more sense, or things I kind of already knew, but it put words to them. So that was the hope for today's discussion. Did we solve it? Did we solve?
I was like, that was such a good end note that, like, could I add something? Maybe, but would it actually add anything? No.
Cool, solve it. If you have any thoughts, you can send us a voicemail or text message at 202-999-3991 or send an email to j@bestofleft.com. Thanks for listening. This is really happening. What you say and do matters. Do what matters most.